Well, it's been interesting times in Canadian politics over the past few weeks. Mark Carney was sworn in as Prime Minister yesterday after Justin Trudeau resigned. That, coupled with the recent Ontario election and the ongoing tariff talk, feels like a real-time lesson in civics. For Jordan Sparks, another tumultuous time in Canadian politics inspired him to create a video game to teach young people about our political system. It's called Civic Story, and you can buy it online where you usually find video games. Jordan dropped by the studio to tell us more.
Good morning, Nev.
Why did you want to create a video game about politics?
Back sometime over a decade ago, Stephen Harper's government was defeated. The government was dissolved. We're heading to the polls and all this stuff. And I'm hearing all this stuff on the news. I'm like, what does that mean? I have no clue what it means. And I'm like Googling a bunch of stuff. I'm like, it was just, we're having an election soon. And it took me like an hour to try to figure that out because all the jargon and all the confusing stuff, and I didn't really know too much about politics. Years later, when I started getting into game development, I sort of reflected on that moment, and I was like, what if there was a game for like past Jordan to actually understand what was actually going on and what they were talking about on the news? And then I just sort of gradually started working on that idea over time, making a game that not only makes you understand civics, but inspires you to vote. Because voting is something that I've been really passionate about. And I see the voting turnout rate in our country go really downwards every year. And so I was like, what if I could make a game that promoted civic literacy and inspired people to vote? And that's how Civic Story came about.
Jordan, take me through step by step how exactly this game works.
So it's a point and click adventure game. It's very, very easy to play, and it's also like you do a lot of reading. But typically, a typical level goes like this. You wake up, you go on transit to your job, which is a marketing executive at a company. You meet your coworkers, you learn about essentially certain things that are going on in political discourse that around that time, both related and unrelated to your job. And then afterwards, you would go back home and like all of us, when we go back home, we just sort of relax, watch TV, go on our computer, go on our phone, and you actually go on your the in-game computer, phone, or TV and see what the news stories of the day are. And some of them, a lot of them are really funny, and they're meant to be really comedic lampoons of a lot of Canadian news and stuff like that, and what the parties are up to and what people are talking about right now. But it also does show you a lot about like actual factual things about Canadian politics, about Canadian history, Indigenous history, a bunch of things. And we even made a lot of sort of news stories that are like parodies of things that are actually going on to get people thinking about these sort of issues. And so then you repeat it all for all 8 chapters. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of things that even the people who think they are politically informed are going to be really surprised in. And if you are somebody who isn't politically informed and you know like almost next to nothing about Canadian politics, this is a game that's built for you. And it's like the entire game is for people who don't actually understand this stuff, and so that they can get a good sense of Canadian politics and an inspired interest to learn more.
It's such an interesting concept because, as you mentioned, we have seen voter turnout decline quite a bit over the last couple of elections. And there's always been this conversation around how do we get people engaged in civics? How do we get people thinking about voting? How do we get people informed? This is quite the avenue to do that. So give us some details regarding what exactly happens in a civic story.
You are confronted with a lot of different issues that are going on in the country, such as, protests, issues around education, talks about like international relations, war, and a bunch of things. And you talk about it with your coworkers in the game, or you talk about it with other people, or you see what other people are thinking and how the things that are going on, how are affecting like the discourse and the news stories and all sorts of different other things. Just form your own sort of opinion on like, how do I understand all these issues and learn about these things. And you can even get like a little glossary terms of like, political jargon, so you can actually understand when they start talking about it on the news.
A lot of education, which is very helpful. What kind of research went into you filling this game with so much content?
So actually, research was a big part of our development process, and it was like one of the big first things I wanted to establish. So we did a lot of our own research, but we also went out and found some experts in many different fields to try and get them to help us understand how does politics affect their field, like, you know, economics or healthcare or other things, and learning about that, and then try and represent that accurately in the game. Even though it's fictional, we want to have a certain amount of accuracy because I feel our audience really needs to trust us and to show that that is accurate. My testers or people are playing it, it's just like, they're like, oh, that's not how it works. And they look it up and like, oh, it actually is. So they learn a lot.
You also found a very unique way of representing the different parties without actually mentioning them. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so all of the parties have actually been changed because we didn't want to get sued or anything. And so, and they're all like very dramatic. So all of the parties have been replaced with parties based around foods. So the conservatives are the blueberry party. The liberals are the tomato party. The NDP is the orange party. The green party is the zucchini party. And one of my favorites, the Bloc Québécois, is the Bagel Québécois. And all of the leaders are parodies of a lot of these political leaders. My favorite one being the guy who's the head of the Bagel Québécois, and so we have them all as like these very dramatized characters to try and make it like exciting. And there's like one of my favorite parts of the game is like a debate section where you watch a political debate and they're all shouting at each other, and they're all like these like animated poses inside of their little podiums and talking about certain issues.
So it sounds like real life.
Yeah, it sounds like a more dramatic version of real life, but the more I see real life, the more I'm like, is this really dramatized anymore?
Why did you choose foods?
Because it was just like a way to lampoon a lot of things. Like a lot of Civic Story is to essentially make fun of Canadian politics while also just like informing people about it. And we want to just have fun with it. We didn't want it to be seen as something that's like super divisive or super serious. We wanted to be a little bit lighthearted. And so we ended up saying, like, you know, let's just name these parties after something silly. And everybody will sort of get the analogs of Canadian politics through that. And I think it's pretty easy to see which party we're talking about when we're doing that. But at the same time, it's like, just try to have fun with it. Be a little silly with politics because, you know, people think it's too serious. Let's try and get it a little bit more accessible.
So humor seems like a way to break down a lot of those barriers and maybe level with people from a sense of understanding. What age range would you say this game is targeted to?
So it was targeted to young adults, so sort of 18 to 24, specifically because that is the least likely demographic to vote. And we wanted them especially to be more inspired to vote. But that being said, though, we wanted it also to be accessible to youth, like people in high school who are in like civics classes, and we'd love to work with schools on that. We also wanted to make it too accessible to, say, older people or people who don't even play games. The game is built to be like super easy to play. So it is aimed at young people, but it's really accessible to all.
I did want to go back to the parties quickly because you did mention the elaborate character you gave to the party that represents the Bloc Québécois, which I guess in this case is the bagel.
Yeah, the
bagel. Which is fascinating. Were you worried at all about any bias that you were putting out there when it came to some of those parties and how they were being represented?
Of course. Bias was something that I was very much concerned with, and I'm not going to, I don't believe that it's purely possible to be like completely politically neutral in something like this, but I wanted to represent different views and get different viewpoints, and which is why I like very much got a bunch of viewpoints in the development process and in our feedback so that we could understand how do people view these things and if we are off the mark. And I wanted to make sure, like, of course, there was no political, like, we're not funded by any political group. My entire thing was trying to squash out like as much bias as I can or showcase as many sides as I can, including squashing out my own bias, to try and show a balanced view of Canadian politics. I feel like we did really get a lot of viewpoints in that game for people to really just sort of ponder over and think about what it means to them. Because at the end of the day, my purpose for this game is not to tell you to vote for a certain party. It's to just get you to vote at all. And I don't care who you vote for as long as you vote. And that's the entire point of the game.
Did this game better your understanding of certain issues?
Oh, absolutely. Like we did a lot of research on this game. I had to confront my own biases. I had to confront even my completely misunderstanding of certain issues, especially healthcare was a big thing that I learned a lot about through this game. When we have an entire chapter just dedicated to understanding how Canadian healthcare works.
And this game is obviously very timely because who knows when our next election is going to take place. Now that we have a new prime minister, it can happen at any moment. But what is the one biggest thing you'd want someone to take away from playing this game outside of just voting?
I want people to have a interest and understanding on how Canadian politics works. I want them to be inspired to be part of the political discourse. I want them to be inspired to vote. I want them to be inspired to just understand the stuff that they are hearing on TV and other places and be able to critically think about the things that we often hear. I want people to understand their own country, especially here in Canada, and I want them to, have a inspired interest in being Canadian and understanding how our own government works and how they can make a difference.
Jordan, I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Jordan Sparks is the creator of Civic Story, a video game that promotes civic literacy. It's available for PC on Steam and itch.